So here's what we're working with today. We have this project file that I put together. You heard it in the intro. I'll just start out and say, so we're at 145 BPM. And the purpose of this is because a lot of times, a lot of James Blake's songs are very, like, in that sort of, like, UK garage, dubstep, post-dubstep, future garage, whatever you want to call it, style. But a lot of times they're sort of a little bit faster, like, especially when he does halftime beats like this one, where, it's just sort of, like, dragging along like that. So I sped it up. Usually, like dubstep, like 138, 140. I did 145. And yeah, that just sort of worked with this. So I have these drums in here, which there's not too much to say about them, but there's a few characteristics that I want to point out. The first thing is, this is like a pattern that could be pretty simple. It's just doom, doom, whatever, like pretty standard, like halftime beat. But what I did was I arranged the kicks and snares in such a way that they were like that they sort of played off of each other. I made this cool groove. And then the hi-hats work with that too. I mean, they're pretty simple. They're just eighth notes, and I did like the velocity like that. But there is this little triplet thing here, and I did that. I noticed he did that in Life Around Here, so I wanted to show that in here. But you can see everything like sort of breathes in a nice way. Like everything sort of works together as opposed to all playing at once. They all play at different times. I guess sort of like to work together. The other thing that I will say is that I used some pretty like thin sounding not like thin sounding drum samples, but very small drum samples. Like these aren't like huge and powerful or like slamming drums by any means. But they do become powerful and they do hit hard because of the way that this song, you mix this. Like, you have to mix them as, like, pretty much the loudest thing in the mix. I mean, that's the case a lot with, I guess, like, electronic music. But if you do that, these small little kicks and these small little snares will still hit hard and will still be loud because it's all relative. It's all relative to what everything else is, how loud everything else is. So that's just a point I want to make there, because like when I first started, I used to think, oh, you just gotta have like the strongest, loudest drum samples. But stuff like this kind of shows me like you don't always need to if you mix it right. And yeah, that was just something I noticed he does a lot on his tracks. So after that, I have this little melodic thing I made on analog. And pretty much, as far as MIDI goes, it's pretty simple. It's just got this bass line. This is something I noticed James Blake doing a lot. He's a pretty good piano player. And so he'll have like these sort of synth lines where it's like, you can almost sort of hear the two hands playing, because there's this top, and then there's this little bass under it. And there's not really much to say about this. I just sort of made this through listening and just sort of playing around, because I don't really know much music theory, to be honest. And yeah, just sort of like doing it by ear worked for me, I guess. But it's really just a matter of playing around and finding stuff that works and trying to, just get creative, Just get messing around, I guess. Now, as far as the synth sound goes, it's a pretty simple one. It's basically just this analog patch, because I wanted to use analog, because I know he uses, I think it's like the Prophet 5 or Prophet 8 or whatever it is. It's that Dave Smith famous synth that he always talks about using. And pretty much I just have two oscillators. One is a saw wave, one is a square wave, one is a saw wave. The saw wave is detuned a little bit just to make it sort of more like warbly, I guess, and make it give it like a little bit more movement, I guess, because without it, it just didn't quite have that vibe. I also gave it a little bit of pulse width modulation, or not modulation. I messed with the pulse width a little bit on the square wave. I put it like there, and that just sort of sounded right to me. I was just playing around. I have the filter, low pass filter, the low pass 24 on here. And that's just doing like a simple pluck type of sound. There's a little bit of attack, no sustain, and a little bit of decay. And the release is just commensurate with what the amp is doing. And then on the amp it's just the default setting, but I turned the sustain down a little bit, just to make it sort of more of a pluck. So not really much else there. So basically after that I just have the vibrato to make it more warbly sounding. Here, I'll show you. So here's before vibrato, and then there's with vibrato. So that really gives it like that analog sound. And then this is where this entire sound is, this unison here. So if you don't know what unison is, essentially by turning on unison and turning on these 4 voices or 2 voices, you're basically playing 2 or 4 of these. Like, imagine copying this over 4 times, and then they're detuned based on how you set this. Now, the one on analog is a little weird, but it worked for this sound. Usually unison is like stereo detuning, so you detune everything, and each voice is in a different ear, or is like panned differently, I guess. But on analog, I'm pretty sure it's mono, which is weird. But then it has like this delay on it, so you can like delay the voices by like milliseconds or whatever. So you can sort of stack them. And that's what gives it like that sort of weird like sound. To me, this kind of sounds like a synth recorded on like an iPhone microphone, like in some room or whatever. So that was the vibe I was going for there. But this is an example of something I want to show. Is like this music is very much about like coming up with interesting sounds out of like pretty simple synth like synthesis, you know? Like, I'm not using, like, Serum and doing, like, any crazy wavetable synthesis or, like, any kind of, like, FM or anything like that. It's really just a matter of using, like, pretty standard stuff and doing something creative with it. And by using this unison and by setting this synth the way that I did along with the music that it's playing, I think I accomplished that pretty well. So after that, I just put this reverb on. And all I really messed with on that was the dry wet, the decay time, and the size, all of which I turned down. And that was just to sort of play up the sort of like roomy sound of this, and also give it a little bit of stereo width because it's completely mono coming out of analog. So after that, I just have a bass line, and that's just playing the bass notes from that analog riff that I had. And all that is like this very simple respace sound. So if you don't know what a respace is, it is you basically just take 2 saw waves, detune one of them, and then put a low pass filter on it. I guess you can also use a bandpass, and there you go. Now you might hear people talk about respaces that obviously don't sound like this. That isn't always the recipe for a respace. They can be made a lot of different ways, but this is a very like standard old school type of one that is more akin to something you would use in this kind of music. And so that's how you would make this one. And I noticed James Blake using these a lot because they're very good. It's just like it's very similar to just a sub, like a sine wave bass, but it has a little bit more harmonic content based on how you set the filter, and most importantly is the movement. So this movement comes from the 2 saw waves are moving, like they're sort of cycling, I guess. And when you have them perfectly like tuned to each other, they move at the same speed, but when you detune one of them, one moves slightly faster than the other because it's at a higher frequency, if that makes any sense. And then there's certain points where they match up in phase. Phase is just the place on the wave that it's playing at any given time, but there's also times when when the phase isn't matched up, and so you get that that movement comes from them sort of like going into phase with each other, or not into phase, but matching up with each other and not being matched up, if that makes any sense. So it's a cool little sound. That's definitely used quite a bit, so it's good to know how to do and good to more importantly like really understand it. So I put a bit warmer on the saturator preset just to sort of bring out the warmth, I guess. And then I put a compressor on and I sidechained it to the kick because this kick and this bass were kind of hitting in some of the similar areas as far as frequencies go, and I wanted to duck the bass out when the kick plays, but have it be kind of subtle. So I didn't sidechain everything. I just did it with the bass because it needed it for mixing. So the next thing I want to talk about is the vocal chops. So something that I think James Blake does extremely well is he chops up his own vocals. And it's a pretty big part of his music because it gives it like this sort of human element when at some points it's very electronic, or just in general, like it really adds like a nice element to his music, and it's really cool that a lot of times he does it with his own voice. That being said, I'm not really so much of a singer, so I just did it with some vocals from some sample packs that I found. And the key here is, oh god, that was a voice crack. They are very sparse and sort of like all over the place, but they all work together, and they all work with what's both the groove and what's going on melodically. So the sparseness feels controlled, and it doesn't just feel like I just place them in random spots. So the best thing I can say about this is people really say like, oh, like how do you chop vocals? How do you do all that? And really the only thing you can do is just sort of dive in. Just get some kind of free vocal sample packs, or like if you got spliced sounds, get a few of them. Like I know one of the really good ones, I actually used it here, is the Are We Dreaming pack. Look into that one, and you just gotta get some stuff and start just go in and start doing stuff. That's really all you can do, and just make sure you keep it in key with the melodic stuff and do something interesting with the rhythm, and you should be good. Now I have these on 2 separate tracks because these were all a lot quieter than these. So I have, if you see the level on this one is a lot lower than this one to compensate for that, so they're both as loud as each other. I could have also just gone in and made the individual clip volumes quieter, but I just did it this way. And yeah, another key is like when I said like sparse, you want them to kind of sound like they're from different sources. Like that's something he does a lot. It almost sounds like he has like different acapellas from himself that he's just chopping up. But yeah, so definitely like trying to make them sound like they're from different sources. Like in this case, I just used ones from multiple different singers. But it's just really a matter of trial and error. Like I said, as long as you keep it in key and do something interesting with the rhythm, it'll probably sound pretty cool. Now, as far as processing, I grouped these together, and I put the bit crusher and a bunch of reverb on them. I noticed that's something he does a lot on his vocals, like not on his main lead vocals, but on like when he chops up vocals a lot of times, he'll put the little bit crusher on it, just to make it a little bit like dirtier and sort of more sampled sounding. And I like it. It gives it a bit of texture and sort of obscures it a little more. And then the reverb, that's pretty straightforward. That's just to make it more atmospheric. But yeah, and then, I mean, that's pretty much it. I did come up with this other thing down here. It's just like this little synth. It's pretty straightforward though. I didn't want to put it in the full mix of everything because it gets a little crowded if you do that. I found. But it sounded like a cool kind of synth. Like maybe this part is like the main part, and then like this is like the part where it gets all dark and like becomes sort of like a drop or something. I don't know. I just want to play with some different ideas. But this one's pretty simple. It's just this really straightforward analog patch. I'll show you. Which is just one saw wave, no filter. The filter's on, but it's not doing anything. The amp is like this, just all the way up and no release. So it's just one static note. And then I put on a little bit of vibrato for the same reason as I put it on here, just to give it a little bit more like analogness, I guess. and sort of make it warbly. I messed around with the D2, but I didn't really use, or the unison, but I didn't end up using it. And then I have this glide on here, and I set this to be monophonic, which means only one note can play at a time. And so when you do that, you can turn on this glide and have it glide between these notes. And so that's pretty much just what I did. I just put in the MIDI for, it's just G and D. They're like fifths of each other or whatever. So then after that, there's not really too much to that. And then after that, I put on this. This is actually a preset for the vocoder in Ableton. But I automated the formant. So it's like kind of squelchy and like it's moving around a lot. You can see it's moving around. And I think I messed with this depth. I'm not sure. And then I just put on, there's a bit warmer on there, of course, just to, I guess, make it a bit warmer. And then I just put on reverb and delay to sort of make it more like wide and spacey. But that's pretty much it, guys. I mean, yeah, there's not really too much to it. It's pretty straightforward, but definitely some cool concepts to be learned, I think. And hopefully you can learn something from this video. So I want to thank you guys so much. I really appreciate all the support. Thank you for watching if you made it through to the end. And yeah, you can download this project file and the samples in the description. Even if you're on like FL Studio or something, you can still get the samples and work with them. So go ahead and do that. You can get my sample packs down in the description as well. They're all just $5. And they're pretty big, so you're getting a pretty good value there. And yeah, thank you so much, guys. Peace.